For my birthday, I rented a beach house and paid for everything. Returning from the pool, I heard my daughter-in-law. We're all couples, so we get the master, my parents the guest room. Your mother is just a lonely old widow. As far as I'm concerned, she can sleep on the floor. I smiled and planned her bedtime surprise. The sound of my daughter-in-law's laughter drifted through the beach house windows like nails on a chalkboard. Ashley and David were discussing sleeping arrangements in the master bedroom, the one I'd specifically reserved and paid for. But according to Ashley, we're all couples, so we get the master, my parents the guest room. Your mother is just a lonely old widow. As far as I'm concerned, she can sleep on the floor. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Sleep on the floor. Not even the smallest bedroom. The actual floor. Here I'd spent $3,000 renting this gorgeous Cape Cod beach house for my 70th birthday weekend. Invited the whole family and stocked it with enough food to feed a small army. And this is how my loving daughter-in-law of 2 years really felt about me. I stood frozen by the sliding glass door, still dripping from my afternoon swim in the pool, my beach towel clutched in my white-knuckled grip. Through the open bedroom window, I could hear David chuckling along with his wife's cruel assessment of his mother. My son, the man I'd helped through college, supported through his early career struggles, and whose wedding I'd practically funded. "You're right, babe," David was saying. "Mom won't mind. She's pretty adaptable these days." Adaptable. That's what they called it when you were grieving the loss of your husband of 48 years. When you were trying to navigate widowhood while pretending to be fine for everyone else's comfort. I'd arrived 2 hours early to set everything up perfectly. The refrigerator was packed with David's favorite craft beer and Ashley's expensive organic everything. I'd arranged fresh flowers in every room and even bought special hypoallergenic pillows for the guest room. The room I'd assumed would be for Ashley's parents, Richard and Linda Hartwell, who were arriving this evening. The master bedroom that I'd specifically requested when booking this place, knowing it had the best ocean view and the bathroom with the soaking tub that might help my arthritic joints. The room I'd been looking forward to for weeks as a small comfort during what would have been Harold's 74th birthday weekend too. But clearly, I was being presumptuous thinking I deserved actual sleeping accommodations in the house I was paying for. Ashley's voice carried clearly through the summer air. Besides, at her age, how much sleep does she really need? She'll probably be up at 5 anyway, wandering around making noise. At my age, I was 70, not 90, and in better shape than most women half my age. I swam daily, did yoga, and could still outwork most people I knew. But in Ashley's mind, I was apparently a decrepit old burden who should be grateful for floor space. From the guest room, I could hear Richard Hartwell's distinctive laugh. Ashley's father was already settling into accommodations that were better than what his daughter thought I deserved in my own rental. I smiled then, not the polite, accommodating smile I'd perfected over years of keeping peace. This was something else entirely, something that probably would have worried them if they could see it. Because Ashley was about to learn that this lonely old widow had a few surprises left in her, and David was about to remember exactly whose name was on the lease for this little paradise. The weekend was young, and I'd planned such a lovely surprise for my ungrateful family. I slipped inside through the kitchen door, my bare feet silent on the polished hardwood floors. The house was exactly as advertised, all white walls, nautical blue accents, and that expensive casual elegance that screamed coastal privilege. Too bad my family was about to discover that privilege came with conditions. Moving quietly to my purse, I pulled out my phone and the folder of paperwork I'd brought. Amazing how prepared you could be when you'd been planning this weekend for months. The rental agreement, the insurance policy, the additional contracts I'd signed, all in my name, Margaret Peterson, all paid for with my money. From the guest room, I could hear Richard and Linda Hartwell unpacking, their voices warm and appreciative as they admired the accommodations. Ashley's parents seemed genuinely pleasant people, which made their daughter's cruelty even more puzzling. Ashley's voice echoed from upstairs. "David, bring my suitcase up here. I want to unpack before dinner." I'd been noticing the dynamic shift more since Harold died 3 years ago. The way they'd started talking around me instead of to me. How Ashley would make plans for the family without asking my opinion, then present them as done deals. The way David had started speaking to me, in that careful tone you'd use with someone whose faculties you questioned. It hadn't always been this way. When David first brought Ashley home 2.5 years ago, I'd been thrilled. She was beautiful, ambitious, articulate, everything I'd wanted for my son. Her parents, Richard and Linda, had seemed lovely during our first meeting, successful but down-to-earth people who clearly adored their daughter. But somewhere along the way, especially after their quick marriage just 6 months later, the dynamic had shifted. Maybe it started when they bought their first house and I'd offered to help with the down payment. Or when Harold got sick during his final year and I'd spent more time at their place, needing the comfort of family during his treatments. Perhaps it was when Harold died and I'd become a reminder of mortality rather than a person with her own needs and feelings. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Time to put on my performance. "Oh, there you are, Mom." David appeared in the kitchen, looking every inch the successful financial advisor in his expensive polo shirt and perfectly pressed khaki shorts. "We were wondering where you'd gone." "Just getting some water after my swim," I said pleasantly, holding up the glass I'd just filled. "The pool is wonderful, perfect temperature." Richard and Linda emerged from the guest room, both looking refreshed and grateful. Richard was a distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, while Linda was perfectly put together in the way of women who'd never worked outside the home, but took their role as wife and mother seriously. "Margaret, this place is absolutely incredible," Linda said warmly, using my preferred name, unlike her daughter. "You've really outdone yourself. Richard and I are so grateful you included us in your birthday celebration." The genuine appreciation from Ashley's parents made their daughter's attitude even more jarring. Ashley descended the stairs like she was making an entrance, her designer sundress flowing dramatically. Everything about her was calculated. The perfectly highlighted hair, the subtle but expensive jewelry, the way she moved through space as if she owned it. "Margaret, this place is absolutely gorgeous," she said, using the formal name she knew I disliked. "Never Mom, never even Maggie like my friends called me. Always Margaret, like I was some distant acquaintance." "You really went all out." "I'm so glad everyone likes it," I replied. "I thought we could have a wonderful family celebration here." David kissed my cheek with the distracted affection of someone checking an item off a list. "It's perfect, Mom. Really. Ashley and I already moved our stuff into the master bedroom, and her parents are settled in the guest room. Hope that works for you?" "Of course," I heard myself say, though my smile felt frozen. "I'm just happy everyone's comfortable." Richard looked puzzled. "But Margaret, where will you be sleeping? Did you book another room somewhere?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ashley's face tensed almost imperceptibly, realizing her father had just highlighted exactly what was wrong with the arrangement. "Oh, Mom's very low maintenance," Ashley said quickly. "She said she'd be fine with the pull-out sofa in the den. Didn't you, Margaret?" The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that I almost applauded. I had never said any such thing, and Ashley knew it. Linda frowned. "The sofa? But dear, this is your birthday weekend. Surely you should have the nicest room." "Really?" "It's fine," I said, maintaining my smile while noting how Ashley's jaw tightened at her mother's reasonable observation. "I'm just happy to have everyone together." But Richard was still looking troubled. "Margaret, I feel terrible taking the guest room when you're the one who organized and paid for this whole weekend." "Dad, please," Ashley interrupted, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "Margaret insisted on this arrangement. She specifically said she wanted David and me to have the master suite for our anniversary." Another lie. Their anniversary wasn't for 3 months. Linda was watching the exchange with growing concern, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. She was obviously a good person who'd raised a daughter who somehow learned to be something else entirely. "Well," I said pleasantly, "I think we should focus on having a lovely family weekend together." Ashley's smile was triumphant, but I caught Linda and Richard exchanging a worried glance. Unlike their daughter, they seemed to possess functioning consciences. After all, the show had only just begun. Dinner was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive theater, with Ashley playing hostess at the table I'd arranged, serving food I'd paid for, to guests I'd invited in a house I'd rented. "Everyone, I want to make a toast," Ashley announced, raising her glass of the premium wine I'd ordered. "To this beautiful weekend that David and I planned for our dear Margaret." Our dear Margaret. Like I was some elderly relative they'd taken pity on, rather than the woman paying for their 5-star weekend. David raised his glass with enthusiasm. To Mom, for being such a good sport about everything. A good sport? For agreeing to sleep on a pull-out sofa while everyone else enjoyed the accommodations I'd provided. Richard and Linda looked increasingly uncomfortable with each passing moment. Unlike their daughter, they seemed to understand the basic courtesy of acknowledging who was actually hosting the celebration. Wait, Richard said carefully, setting down his wine glass. David, didn't Margaret plan and pay for this entire weekend? She's the one who called and invited us. Ashley's smile never wavered, but I caught the flash of annoyance in her eyes. Well, of course Margaret helped with some of the logistics, but David and I really wanted to do something special for her birthday. We've been planning this for months. The lie was so bold, so completely fabricated, that Linda actually blinked in surprise. Planning this? Linda repeated slowly. Ashley, you called me 3 days ago and said Margaret had invited us to her birthday weekend at a beach house. My daughter-in-law's face went through several micro-expressions before settling on injured innocence. Mom, you're misremembering. David and I have been coordinating with Margaret for weeks. That's not what you... Linda started. But Richard placed a gentle hand on her arm. I could see the moment Richard and Linda realized exactly what kind of person their daughter had become. The look that passed between them was one of recognition and shared shame. This is delicious seafood, Richard said diplomatically, clearly trying to change the subject. Margaret, you have excellent taste in restaurants. Thank you, I replied. I wanted everyone to experience the best Cape Cod has to offer. Ashley was visibly struggling to regain control of the narrative. Of course, we all contributed to making this weekend special. It's really been a family effort. Linda was staring at her daughter now with an expression I couldn't quite read. Ashley, what exactly did you contribute to this weekend? The question was asked quietly, but it carried the weight of a mother who was beginning to see her child clearly for the first time. Well, David and I have been helping with the planning and... The planning you did 3 days ago when you called to tell us we were invited to Margaret's birthday party. Linda's voice was getting cooler by the moment. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of getting more wine, but really, I needed to process what I was witnessing. Ashley's own parents were beginning to see through her deceptions, and they clearly didn't like what they were discovering. Through the dining room archway, I could hear Linda's voice, carefully controlled. Ashley, I think we need to discuss proper gratitude. Margaret has been incredibly generous to include us in her celebration. Mom, you don't understand the full situation. I understand perfectly, Richard interrupted, his voice firm. Margaret organized this weekend, paid for everything, and invited us to join her birthday celebration. The least we can do is acknowledge her generosity honestly. When I returned with the wine, the atmosphere at the table had shifted dramatically. Ashley looked cornered, David appeared confused by the tension, and Richard and Linda were regarding their daughter with obvious disappointment. Margaret, Linda said warmly as I refilled her glass, Richard and I want you to know how grateful we are to be included in your birthday weekend. This is incredibly generous of you. It's my pleasure, I replied sincerely. I'm so glad you could both be here. Ashley's face was rigid with controlled anger. But she couldn't contradict her own parents' version of events without looking even worse. As I looked around the table at my assembled family, I caught Linda watching me with something approaching understanding. She was beginning to piece together exactly how her daughter had been treating me, and the realization was clearly disturbing her. But let Ashley squirm. Let her try to maintain her lies in front of parents who'd apparently raised her with better values than she'd chosen to keep. Because tomorrow was my actual birthday, and I had such lovely surprises planned for everyone. I woke before dawn, as was my habit, and stood on the deck watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold. The house was quiet except for the sound of waves and the gentle murmur of voices from the guest room. Richard and Linda were early risers too, apparently. Through their slightly open window, I could hear them talking in low, troubled tones. I don't understand what's happened to her, Linda was saying. The way she spoke about Margaret last night, taking credit for everything. That's not how we raised her. She's always been ambitious, Richard replied quietly. But this is different. This is dishonest and cruel. They were talking about their daughter, and the pain in their voices was unmistakable. Good parents grappling with the reality that their child had become someone they didn't recognize. By 8 o'clock, the house was stirring to life. Ashley emerged from my bedroom wearing the silk pajamas I'd given her last Christmas, stretching luxuriously as she admired the ocean view from the master suite's private balcony. "Good morning, Margaret," she called down to where I sat reading on the main deck. "Sleep well on the sofa?" The sofa, not the floor she'd originally suggested, but still a deliberate reminder of my diminished status in the hierarchy she'd created. "Wonderfully," I called back. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Richard and Linda appeared next, both looking troubled. Linda approached me with obvious concern. "Margaret, dear, we need to talk about the sleeping arrangements. Richard and I are perfectly comfortable taking the sofa bed, and you should have the guest room. This is your celebration." "That's very kind." "But it's not kind, it's basic decency," Richard interrupted firmly. "We're guests in the house you rented. You shouldn't be sleeping on furniture while we have a proper bedroom." Ashley materialized at the sliding door, her face tight with controlled panic. "Mom, Dad, we discussed this last night." "Margaret specifically requested this arrangement." "No, Ashley," Linda said, her voice carrying a mother's authority. "You told us Margaret requested it, but we never heard Margaret say any such thing." David appeared, coffee in hand, clearly sensing the tension. "What's going on?" "Your mother-in-law," Richard said deliberately, "is sleeping on a sofa while her guests occupy the bedrooms in the house she rented and paid for. We're discussing how to correct this inappropriate situation." I watched Ashley's face as her father essentially called her behavior inappropriate to her face. The mask was slipping, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "Dad, you don't understand the full context. Then explain it," Linda demanded. "Explain how it makes sense for Margaret to sleep on furniture during her own birthday weekend." The first surprise arrived at 9:30, cutting through the family tension. A catering truck from the most exclusive restaurant in Provincetown, followed by a florist's van and a party rental truck. "Margaret?" Ashley appeared at the sliding door, momentarily distracted from defending herself to her parents. "What's all this?" "My birthday party, dear," I said pleasantly. "I thought we should do something really special." Richard and Linda exchanged glances, clearly realizing that the generosity they'd witnessed so far was just the beginning. David joined Ashley, his executive brain calculating costs. "Mom, this looks extremely expensive. Are you sure? Am I sure I can afford to celebrate my own 70th birthday in style?" I laughed, a sound that made them all step back slightly. "Oh, David, I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly who can afford what around here." The second surprise was a black sedan pulling into the driveway. My lawyer, Patricia Williams, stepped out looking every inch the formidable attorney she was, carrying a briefcase full of documents we'd been preparing together for the past 6 months. Linda nudged Richard, who straightened with obvious relief. Finally, someone who might bring some sanity to whatever was happening. "Mrs. Peterson," Patricia said warmly, climbing the deck stairs. "Beautiful property you've rented here." "That I've rented," I repeated, making sure everyone caught the emphasis. "Yes, it is lovely, isn't it?" Ashley's eyes darted between Patricia and me, while her parents watched with growing understanding. "This is Patricia Williams, my attorney," I announced. "Patricia, these are Ashley's parents, Richard and Linda Hartwell, my son David, and my daughter-in-law, Ashley." The word attorney had different effects on different people. Ashley went pale. David's coffee required his complete attention, but Richard and Linda looked almost hopeful. "Attorney?" Ashley's voice climbed an octave. "Margaret, why do you need an attorney for a birthday party?" "Mrs. Peterson asked me to bring some documents to review with the family," Patricia said with professional warmth. "Nothing dramatic, just some clarifications about property rights and financial responsibilities that we've been working on." Richard was nodding approvingly. Finally, someone was looking out for Margaret's interests. But the third surprise was just pulling into the driveway, a moving truck, and that explanation was going to change everything. The moving truck was modest, just enough space for the belongings Ashley and David had brought for the weekend. I'd arranged for everything to be relocated to the charming bed and breakfast down the road. "You can't be serious," Ashley whispered, watching workers carry her designer luggage past the windows. Richard and Linda stood frozen, watching their daughter's belongings being removed while trying to process what this meant. "Oh, but I am," I said, settling back into my deck chair. "Patricia, would you mind explaining the legal situation to my family?" Patricia consulted her notes with professional pleasure. "Mrs. Peterson holds the sole rental agreement for this property. She has exclusive rights to determine occupancy. When someone misrepresents their role in organizing or funding an event, it creates grounds for removal." "Removal?" Linda gasped, looking at her daughter with dawning horror. David found his voice. "Mom, this is insane. We're family." "Are we?" I interrupted. "Because family members don't usually suggest that their mothers sleep on floors. Family members don't steal credit for generosity, and they don't lie to their own parents about who organized what." Richard's face was grim as pieces fell into place. "Ashley, did you tell us Margaret wanted to sleep on the sofa?" Ashley's survival instincts kicked in. "Dad, this is all a misunderstanding. Margaret's been acting strangely lately, and I was just trying to manage—" "Manage what?" Linda's voice was sharp now. "Margaret seems perfectly clear-thinking to me. She organized this weekend, paid for everything, and invited us graciously. What exactly did you think you were managing?" Patricia pulled out a document. "Perhaps this will help clarify things. This is the rental agreement, signed solely by Mrs. Peterson, along with receipts for catering, flowers, and all weekend expenses. Total cost, approximately $8,000. Richard's face went white. $8,000? Ashley, did you know Margaret was spending that much on this weekend? It wasn't supposed to be that expensive because you weren't paying for it," Linda said quietly, the full scope of her daughter's behavior finally becoming clear. "You were taking credit for generosity you couldn't afford to show." Ashley dropped to her knees beside my chair in theatrical desperation. "Margaret, please. I didn't mean those things about the floor. I was just stressed about arrangements, trying to make sure everyone was comfortable. By taking the master bedroom I reserved and paid for?" Richard stepped forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Ashley, stand up. This is undignified." But Ashley ignored her father, grabbing my hands. "Please don't throw us out. This is your birthday weekend. We can work this out." "Can we?" I asked gently. "Because I heard you quite clearly yesterday. She can sleep on the floor were your exact words about me. Not the sofa, the floor." Linda gasped audibly. "The floor! Ashley, you suggested Margaret sleep on the floor?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ashley seemed to realize that admitting this in front of her parents made her look even worse. "I was joking," Ashley said weakly. "It was just a joke between family." "No," Richard said firmly. "That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty." Patricia cleared her throat diplomatically. "Mrs. Peterson has arranged alternative accommodations for David and Ashley at the Anchor Inn down the road. Victorian charm, shared facilities, continental breakfast included." "Shared bathroom?" Ashley gasped. "At your age, I thought you might appreciate a more authentic experience," I said sweetly. Linda was staring at her daughter with something approaching grief. "Ashley, what have you become?" David's business mind was trying to salvage something. "Mom, if you've paid for everything, let me reimburse you." "With what money?" I asked innocently. "David, you've received over $70,000 from me in the past 18 months. Where has it all gone?" Richard and Linda turned to stare at their daughter in shock. $70,000? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Ashley stood up slowly, mascara creating dark tracks down her cheeks. "You don't understand. David needed help, and I was just—" "You were just what?" Linda demanded. "Using Margaret's generosity to fund what exactly?" I looked at this woman who'd humiliated me in front of her own parents, who'd planned to make me sleep on the floor of a house I'd rented, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, righteous power. "I want my son back," I said simply. "Not the man who lets his wife humiliate his mother in front of her own parents. Not the person who's forgotten basic respect and gratitude." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's entirely reasonable. Margaret. But most of all, I wanted Ashley to understand that this lonely old widow had more strength than she'd ever imagined." The bed and breakfast called within an hour. Ashley and David had arrived, been shown to their room, and Ashley had immediately demanded to speak with the manager about their unacceptable accommodations. "Mrs. Peterson," the manager said when she called me, Your daughter-in-law seems very upset about the shared bathroom situation. She's asking if you'll cover additional charges for a suite upgrade. I was sitting on my deck with Richard and Linda, who had insisted on staying to help me process what had happened. They seemed determined to distance themselves from their daughter's behavior. Absolutely not, I told the manager. They're responsible for any charges beyond the basic room. I see. They provided a credit card, but it was declined. They're currently discussing their options. After hanging up, Linda shook her head sadly. Margaret, I owe you an enormous apology. We raised Ashley to be better than this. You did raise her to be better, I said gently. I could see that from the moment you arrived. You're good people who are horrified by what your daughter has become. Richard was staring out at the ocean, his face heavy with disappointment. We never taught her to take credit for other people's generosity or to treat elders with such disrespect. I don't understand where this came from. I've been wondering the same thing for months, I admitted. The Ashley I met 2 years ago seemed different. Ambitious, yes, but not cruel. Something changed after she married David. Patricia had stayed to help us understand the situation better. She pulled out her files with careful professionalism. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, there are some things about your daughter's recent behavior that you should know. Mrs. Peterson and I have been investigating some financial irregularities. Linda looked stricken. Financial irregularities? Over the past 18 months, Ashley has received substantial assistance from Mrs. Peterson. Over $70,000 supposedly for mortgage help and household expenses. But the money doesn't seem to have gone where it was intended. Richard's face went gray. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. Richard, Linda, I started noticing 6 months ago that no matter how much help I provided, David and Ashley's financial situation never seemed to improve. Patricia and I began looking into where my assistance was actually going. And? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. Patricia consulted her notes. Approximately $30,000 went to legitimate household expenses. The rest appears to have been redirected to personal purchases, luxury items, and payments toward pre-existing debts. Pre-existing debts? Richard asked sharply. I hesitated, then decided these good people deserve the truth. Ashley came into this marriage with significant financial obligations from her previous relationship. She's been using my assistance to David to pay those debts while telling him the money was for their household. Linda buried her face in her hands. Oh, Margaret, what has she done to your family? My phone rang, David calling. I could hear Ashley crying in the background, and David's voice was strained with desperation. Mom, please, we can't afford to stay anywhere else. Our credit cards are maxed out, and we don't have cash for even one night. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before claiming credit for a weekend you couldn't afford to host, I said calmly. Richard gestured for the phone. David, this is Richard Hartwell. Son, you and Ashley need to come back here right now and have an honest conversation with your mother. There was a pause. Mr. Hartwell? Yes, sir. We'll be right there. When David and Ashley returned an hour later, they found Richard and Linda sitting with me and Patricia, united in their concern for my well-being. Ashley looked devastated, her perfect composure completely shattered. Mom, Dad, you can't side with her against me. We're not siding with anyone, Linda said firmly. We're siding with decency. Margaret has been incredibly generous to our family, and you've repaid that generosity with disrespect and dishonesty. David looked confused and increasingly desperate. What dishonesty? Ashley, what are they talking about? Richard stood up, every inch the disappointed father. David, your wife suggested that your mother sleep on the floor of the house your mother rented and paid for. Then she lied to us about who organized this weekend and attempted to take credit for your mother's generosity. The words hit David like physical blows. Sleep on the floor? Ashley, you said Mom preferred the sofa bed. Ashley's face crumpled as she realized her own parents had betrayed her version of events. And there's more, Patricia added gently, about the $70,000 in assistance and where it's actually been going. I watched my son's face as the truth finally began to penetrate years of manipulation and lies. The real reckoning was just beginning, but for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't facing it alone. Richard and Linda had chosen to stand with truth over loyalty to their daughter, and that gave me hope that this family could still be saved. Patricia returned from her car with additional files, the result of our 6-month investigation. Richard and Linda watched from the deck as Patricia spread documents across my dining room table, their faces grave with the knowledge that they were about to learn more disturbing truths about their daughter. "What exactly are we looking at?" Richard asked, settling beside Linda as we gathered around the table. "Research," I said quietly. "When you're 70 and recently widowed, people assume you're helpless, but they forget that some of us had full careers before we became wives and mothers." "What kind of research?" Linda's voice was tight with dread. Patricia looked up from organizing her files. "Mrs. Peterson hired me 6 months ago when she noticed financial irregularities that concerned her. We've been quietly investigating Ashley's background and the family's financial patterns. I joined them at the table, 6 months of careful work spread before us." Richard and Linda deserved to know the full scope of what their daughter had become. "Background investigation?" Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. "On Ashley? When someone marries into your family and immediately begins manipulating financial assistance while isolating the benefactor from their support systems. It's worth doing homework," I explained gently. Patricia opened her first folder with professional care. "Your daughter's history shows some very concerning patterns." The first document she showed us was a divorce decree from Connecticut dated just 8 months before Ashley met David. She'd been married to a man named Robert Hutchins, a successful architect. "She was divorced so recently?" Richard gasped. "She told us she'd been single for 2 years when she met David." "The divorce was contentious," Patricia continued. "Mr. Hutchins cited financial irresponsibility, undisclosed debts, and misrepresentation of expenses. Ashley had been opening credit accounts without his knowledge." Linda was staring at the documents with growing horror. "She's done this before. At least twice that we can document. We found evidence of 2 previous relationships with financially stable men. Both ended with the men reporting financial manipulation and trust violations." Patricia pulled out more files. "There's also this." She showed us a photograph of Ashley at what appeared to be a charity gala, her arm around a distinguished gentleman with silver hair. The date stamp was from 3 years ago. "Who is he?" Richard asked, though his voice suggested he dreaded the answer. "James Morrison, 68 years old, widower. His adult children contacted me during our investigation. They're part of a support group for families affected by financial elder abuse. Morrison died of a heart attack last year after changing his will to include Ashley." Linda made a small, pained sound. "Dear God, what kind of person did we raise?" My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Ashley urgently. I have information about her other victims. MB." I showed the message to Patricia, who quickly traced the number. "Marcus Brennan," she read. "Ashley's brother. According to records, he's been trying to contact you for 6 months through various channels." Richard looked up sharply. "Marcus? Ashley's brother Marcus? You know him?" I asked. "We haven't seen Marcus in over 2 years," Linda said slowly. "Ashley told us he was having mental health issues and that we should avoid contact with him for our own well-being." The pattern was becoming clearer. Ashley had been systematically isolating herself from anyone who might expose her behavior, including her own family members. "Based on our investigation," Patricia continued, "Ashley hasn't just been misusing Mrs. Peterson's assistance. She's been researching Margaret's other assets, including life insurance policies and investment accounts." I felt the blood drain from my face. Harold's life insurance was my financial safety net, the foundation of my independence. "She's been what?" Richard's voice was dangerous now. "Through David, yes. We found paperwork where she encouraged him to explore family financial assistance options based on the policies. Nothing illegal, but definitely concerning given the pattern." Linda was crying quietly now, the weight of her daughter's systematic deception overwhelming her. My phone rang. David's number, but Ashley's voice answered, shrill with panic. "Margaret, we need to come back immediately. There's been some kind of mistake with our accounts, and we need help sorting this out." "I'm sure you do," I said calmly. "But I'm afraid I'm busy reviewing some very illuminating financial documents with your parents." The line went quiet. Through the speaker, we could all hear Ashley's sharp intake of breath as she realized her parents were learning the truth. "Ashley," I continued pleasantly, "your parents are here, and they're very interested in understanding your recent behavior patterns." I hung up and turned to Richard and Linda, both of whom looked devastated but resolute. They're coming back, I said. Richard stood up slowly, his face hard with determination. Good. It's time our daughter faced the consequences of her choices. Linda nodded through her tears. Margaret, whatever happens next, please know that we're on your side. Ashley may be our daughter, but what she's done to you and David is unforgivable. But the conversation we were about to have would reveal that Ashley's deceptions ran even deeper than we'd imagined. Marcus Brennan arrived just as Ashley and David's car pulled into the driveway. A lean man in his 40s with tired eyes, he carried a briefcase and the expression of someone who'd been carrying heavy secrets for too long. Mrs. Peterson, thank you for agreeing to see me, he said, glancing nervously at the approaching car. I've been trying to reach you for months, but Ashley's been intercepting communications. Richard and Linda stood up immediately. Marcus? Linda rushed to embrace him. We've missed you so much. Ashley said that you didn't want to see us. Marcus's face hardened. Ashley has been lying to you about me, just like she's been lying about everything else. Patricia verified his identification while David and Ashley climbed the deck stairs. Ashley's face went white when she saw her brother sitting with her parents and me. Marcus, what are you doing here? Cleaning up your mess, as usual, he replied coldly. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell deserve to know what their daughter has become. David looked confused, his eyes darting between faces. Ashley, I thought your brother was in therapy and couldn't see family. That's what she told you? Marcus laughed bitterly. I've been trying to contact this family for months to warn them about Ashley's pattern of behavior. Ashley's panic was visible now. Marcus has issues with boundaries and— The only boundary issue here, Richard interrupted firmly, is your complete lack of respect for other people's property, generosity, and dignity. Marcus opened his briefcase and began spreading out documents. Mrs. Peterson, your family needs to understand that Ashley doesn't just manipulate finances. She studies people's vulnerabilities and systematically exploits them. He handed me a folder containing what appeared to be surveillance notes and photographs. Ashley researches her targets extensively. She learns their routines, their emotional triggers, and their financial situations. Linda was staring at her daughter with growing horror. Ashley, what is this? Marcus is mentally unstable, Ashley said desperately. You can't believe anything he says. I can believe documented evidence, Patricia said, examining Marcus's files. These are detailed observations about Mrs. Peterson's daily activities, her social connections, and her financial resources. David was reading over Patricia's shoulder, his face going gray. Ashley, these are notes about my mother's swimming schedule, her doctor's appointments, her friends. Why would you document all this? I wanted to understand the family dynamics better. You were mapping out vulnerabilities, Marcus said flatly. It's what you do. You did it to Robert Hutchins, to James Morrison, and now to this family. Richard's voice was steady but cold. Ashley, I want you to explain to me why you have surveillance notes on Margaret. They're not surveillance notes. Ashley's composure was cracking completely. I was just trying to be a good daughter-in-law, understanding Mom's needs. By suggesting she sleep on the floor? Linda's voice cut through Ashley's explanations like a blade. The reference to the floor comment landed like a bomb. David stared at his wife in shock. Sleep on the floor? Ashley, you told me Mom preferred the sofa because it was more comfortable for her back. Marcus pulled out more files. Ashley has used this approach before. She isolates her targets from their support systems while positioning herself as indispensable. The goal is complete financial control. Financial control? David's voice was rising. Ashley, what is he talking about? Patricia consulted her notes. Based on our investigation, Ashley has been using your mother's assistance not just for household expenses, but to pay debts from her previous relationships while building new ones. Richard stood up, his face flushed with anger. Ashley Marie Hartwell, you will tell us the truth right now. What debts? What previous relationships? The use of her full name, the way her father had addressed her as a child when she was in serious trouble, seemed to break something in Ashley. She collapsed into a chair, her perfect facade finally crumbling. I owe money, she whispered. From before David, from Robert, from other people. How much money? Linda demanded. Marcus answered for her. Approximately $90,000 in various debts, legal fees, and settlements from her previous relationships. David went pale. $90,000. Ashley, where did all that debt come from? Life is complicated, David. You don't understand what it costs to maintain. To maintain what? Richard's voice was thunderous now. A lifestyle funded by deceiving good people like Margaret? My phone rang. The police, as I'd expected they would eventually call. Mrs. Peterson? This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Connecticut State Police. We're investigating financial irregularities involving Ashley Hartwell Peterson. We'd like to speak with her and her family at your earliest convenience. Ashley's face went white as paper. Detective, I said calmly. We're in Massachusetts for the weekend, but Ashley is here if you need to speak with her. Actually, ma'am, we'd prefer to speak with you first. You may be a victim in a larger pattern of financial manipulation we've been investigating. After hanging up, I looked around at my assembled family. Richard and Linda looked devastated, but determined to see justice done. Marcus appeared relieved that the truth was finally coming out. David seemed to be processing the destruction of everything he'd believed about his marriage. And Ashley looked like exactly what she was, a cornered predator with no escape route left. The silence that followed the police call was broken by Linda's quiet crying. She wasn't mourning her daughter's situation. She was grieving the person she'd thought Ashley was. How long have the police been investigating you? Richard asked his daughter, his voice hollow. It's not what you think, Ashley said desperately. Robert is just bitter about our divorce. He's trying to cause trouble. By reporting financial crimes? Marcus interrupted. Ashley, the police have documentation of a pattern spanning multiple relationships. This isn't about one bitter ex-husband. David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Ashley, how much of our marriage has been built on lies? David, please. How much? His voice was harder now, his business executive persona finally asserting itself. Because I'm starting to realize that I don't know anything true about you. Patricia pulled out a timeline she'd constructed. David, your wife has been systematically misrepresenting her financial situation from the beginning of your relationship. The money she claimed to need for emergencies, household expenses, and investments, most of it went to paying debts from her previous relationships. Richard was pacing now, his anger building. Ashley, you used this family's generosity to clean up messes from your past while creating new ones. I was trying to start fresh, Ashley sobbed. I wanted to be a good wife to David, but I had obligations. Obligations you hid from him, Linda said coldly. Obligations you manipulated Margaret into funding without her knowledge. David stood up suddenly, his face twisted with realization and self-disgust. The emergency car repairs that cost $3,000. Ashley, did our car actually need repairs? Ashley's silence was answer enough. The medical bills for your specialist appointments? More silence. The investment opportunity that required upfront money? David, I can explain how many of the emergencies that required my mother's help were real, David demanded, his voice rising with each word. Marcus consulted his files. Based on documentation from Ashley's previous relationships, approximately 70% of her claimed emergencies are fabricated. She creates financial crises to justify requesting assistance. I watched my son's face as the full scope of his wife's deception became clear. Every crisis, every emergency, every desperate request for help had been calculated manipulation. David, I said gently, your wife didn't just lie to you about money. She studied your family, learned our vulnerabilities, and targeted us systematically. Richard nodded grimly. Son, our daughter is not the woman you married. She's not even the woman we raised. She's become something none of us recognize. Ashley made one final desperate play. Mom, Dad, please. Yes, I made mistakes with money, but I love David. I love this family. Don't destroy my marriage over financial issues we can work through. Work through? Linda's voice was ice. Ashley, you suggested that Margaret sleep on the floor of a house she rented and paid for. That's not a financial issue. That's a character issue. It was a joke. It was cruelty, Richard said firmly. And it revealed exactly who you've become. David was staring at his hands, the weight of everything finally settling on him. Ashley, I have to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you target my family because we were vulnerable after Dad died? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Even Ashley seemed to realize that any answer would damn her. Marcus filled the silence. Ashley researches obituaries and social media for recently widowed families with adult children. Men between 35 and 50 are ideal targets because they're grieving while trying to support aging parents. David's face crumpled. You targeted me because my father died. David, that's not... You saw a grieving son with a widowed mother and thought opportunity. David continued, his voice breaking. You didn't fall in love with me. You recruited me. Ashley was crying now, but they seemed like tears of frustration rather than genuine remorse. I did love you, she whispered. I do love you. No, David said quietly, standing up with new resolve. You loved what I could provide. You loved access to my mother's generosity and my family's trust. But you never loved me. Richard and Linda stood with David, united in their support of truth over their daughter's lies. Ashley, Richard said heavily, you need to leave. Now. Dad, please. You've humiliated this family, manipulated a grieving widow, and destroyed your marriage through systematic deception. I'm ashamed to call you my daughter. The words hit Ashley like physical blows, but she had no defense left. As she gathered her purse and car keys with shaking hands, she looked around at all of us one last time. This isn't over, she said, but her voice carried no conviction. Yes, I said quietly. It is. Ashley left that evening, driving away in the growing darkness with nothing but her purse and the clothes she was wearing. She'd finally run out of lies, allies, and excuses. David sat on the deck staring at the ocean, processing the destruction of his marriage and the revelation of his wife's true nature. Richard and Linda flanked him like protective parents, their own grief mixed with concern for the son-in-law they'd grown to love. How did I miss it? David asked for the third time. How did I not see what she was doing to Mom? Because she's an expert, Marcus said gently. He'd stayed to help us all understand Ashley's methods. She studies people professionally. She knows how to exploit love, guilt, and family loyalty. But I should have protected Mom instead of enabling Ashley's behavior. Richard placed a firm hand on David's shoulder. Son, you were manipulated by someone who made manipulation her career. That doesn't excuse the choices you made, but it explains them. Linda was sitting beside me, still processing the scope of her daughter's deceptions. Margaret, how do we apologize for what Ashley did to you? How do we make amends for the pain our daughter caused? You already have, I said softly. By choosing truth over loyalty to Ashley, by standing with David when he needed support, by showing me that good people can raise children who choose to be something else entirely. Patricia had stayed to help us understand the legal implications of Ashley's departure. Mrs. Peterson, we have enough documentation to pursue recovery of most of the misappropriated funds. Ashley's pattern with previous victims creates a strong civil case. What about the police investigation? David asked. Detective Morrison will want to interview all of you as witnesses. Ashley's activities appear to be part of a larger investigation into financial elder abuse patterns. The phone rang around midnight. David answered, then handed it to me with a grim expression. It's Detective Morrison. Ashley was arrested at the Massachusetts border trying to cross into New Hampshire. I took the phone calmly. Detective? Mrs. Peterson, we apprehended Ashley Peterson at a traffic stop. She had documents in her possession suggesting she was planning to leave the state permanently. We also found evidence linking her to other ongoing investigations. What kind of evidence? Financial records, identity documents for multiple names, and contact information for potential new targets. Mrs. Peterson, your case helped us uncover a much larger operation. After hanging up, I looked around at my family. David, Richard, Linda, and Marcus, all united in their relief that Ashley's crime spree was finally over. She's not coming back, I said simply. David nodded slowly. Good. I need time to figure out how to rebuild my life without her lies. Richard stood up, looking older than his years. Margaret, Linda, and I want you to know that we consider you family regardless of what happens with David and Ashley's marriage. You've shown more grace and strength than we had any right to expect. You're good people, I assured them. Ashley's choices don't reflect on how you raised her. Linda squeezed my hand. We'd like to stay in touch if you'll have us. We've lost a daughter tonight, but we'd be honored to keep the friendship we've found with you. As we sat together under the stars, I realized that Ashley's plan to isolate and destroy my family had backfired completely. Instead of breaking us apart, Her manipulation had brought together people who truly cared about each other. "What happens now?" David asked quietly. "Now we heal," I said. "We rebuild trust slowly and carefully. We remember that family is supposed to be a source of strength, not exploitation." The ocean continued its eternal conversation with the shore, and I sat surrounded by people who had chosen love over lies, truth over convenience. Ashley had tried to reduce me to a lonely old widow who could sleep on floors. Instead, she'd reminded me that I was Margaret Peterson, a woman strong enough to fight for her family and wise enough to know the difference between love and manipulation. 3 months later, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Ashley had pled guilty to multiple counts of elder financial abuse and fraud spanning 3 states. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with restitution orders for all her victims. I was sitting on my own deck at home, reading the letter while David finished painting my kitchen. He'd moved back to his childhood bedroom temporarily while sorting out his divorce and the financial mess Ashley had left behind. "Good news?" he asked, joining me with 2 cups of coffee. "Justice news," I corrected, showing him the letter. "Ashley won't be manipulating any more families for a while." David nodded soberly. "Part of me feels sorry for her. Prison seems harsh." "David, she studied vulnerable people like a predator studies prey. Prison isn't harsh, it's appropriate." Richard and Linda had become regular visitors, determined to maintain the family connection Ashley had tried to destroy. They'd also been working with authorities to help other victims of Ashley's schemes. "The Morrison family called yesterday," I told David. "James Morrison's children want to thank us for helping expose Ashley. Apparently, our case provided evidence they needed for their civil suit." "How many victims were there total?" 12 that we know of. The youngest was 62, the oldest was 81. Ashley specifically targeted people going through major life transitions. David was quiet for a moment, processing the scope of his ex-wife's crimes. "Mom, I need to say something I should have said months ago." "What's that?" "I'm sorry. Not just for enabling Ashley's behavior, but for losing sight of who you are. You're not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. You're my mother, and you deserve respect and love, not manipulation and exploitation." I reached over and took his hand. "David, you were manipulated by an expert, but what matters is that when you saw the truth, you chose to believe it. It took me too long, but you got there, and now we rebuild." Patricia had helped us recover most of the money Ashley had stolen, and David had insisted on paying back every penny he'd unknowingly been part of taking. It would take him years, but he was determined to make full restitution. "There's something else," David said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "I got this yesterday." It was a job offer from a financial firm in Boston that specialized in elder financial protection. They'd heard about our case and wanted David to help develop programs to prevent the kind of manipulation Ashley had perpetrated. "It's perfect," I said, reading the details. "You'd be helping other families avoid what we went through." "I wanted to ask your permission first. The job would mean traveling sometimes, leaving you alone." "David," I interrupted gently, "I'm 70, not helpless. I can manage a few days alone." He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "Right. I keep forgetting that the lonely old widow thing was Ashley's narrative, not reality." Marcus had become part of our extended family too, visiting regularly and sharing stories about the sister he'd tried for years to help before finally accepting that she'd chosen a destructive path. "You know what the strangest part is?" David asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "What?" "I feel free for the first time in 2 years. I didn't realize how much energy it takes to live with someone who's constantly manipulating you." "Freedom is precious," I agreed, "especially when you've forgotten what it feels like." The doorbell rang, and David went to answer it. He returned with Richard and Linda, both carrying grocery bags and wearing the comfortable smiles of people who'd become genuine friends. "Sunday dinner ingredient delivery," Linda announced. "I hope you don't mind us inviting ourselves again." "You're always welcome here," I assured them. "This is what family should feel like." As we prepared dinner together, David, Richard, Linda, and I reflected on how much had changed since that weekend at the beach house. Ashley had tried to isolate me, control me, and ultimately dispose of me. Instead, she'd taught me something valuable about my own strength and the difference between real family and manipulative relationships. "Margaret," Linda said as we set the table, "I want you to know something. Having you in our lives has reminded us what healthy family relationships look like. Ashley's behavior had made us forget. We're all learning together," I replied. David raised his wine glass as we sat down to eat. "To second chances, honest conversations, and families that choose each other. To strong women who refuse to be underestimated," Richard added, nodding at me. "To the truth setting us free," Linda concluded. We clinked glasses as the sun set outside my windows, surrounded by people who had chosen love over lies, truth over convenience, and family over manipulation. Ashley had called me a lonely old widow who could sleep on floors, but sitting at my own table, in my own home, surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I knew exactly who I was. Margaret Peterson, a woman who'd survived 70 years of challenges and had the strength to fight for what mattered most. And this time, I'd won. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.